Here comes our next speaker who writes about traveling and popular culture. He started with Every City, which is a story of a unique city centric graphic storytelling initiative. So, his latest graphic novel was published both in Germany as well as India. So, sir, we are eagerly waiting to hear from you.
Yeah, hello. Thank you for that introduction. Am I being heard?
Yes, sir.
So what I'm going to do in this presentation, which is around 45 minutes, will be to talk about the making of a graphic novel using my last as this one, The Cities Beneath, out in German and in English, using this as a case study, because obviously I'm kind of fully familiar with this entire, the production pipeline from ideation, writing the script, working with the artist, and the inking, penciling, coloring, lettering, and so on, and the final output. So that would be interesting to people who want to take up, writing graphic novels or comics or whatever you call it. And the other point is, I also, because I'm not sure of the composition of the audience, I will in between also talk a little bit about the creative process and tips and suggestions and so on. Those of you who are already experienced would not need it, but those freshers or those youngsters out there, something on on the creative life. And finally, I'll also have some general observations on anybody who's working with text and image. So it could be filmmakers, it could be script writers, it could be ad professionals, advertising professionals. So these are things which are common to all these fields. So yeah, so let me just dive in. Is this visible to everybody? I just want to check the resolution. So
Yes, it is. It is.
yeah, so I mean, people call them chitrakadas, comics, graphic novels, whatever it is. So I am not a theoretician. I'm a journalist by profession, and I've gotten into comics because of my love for the genre and the medium. And so I'm not going to go into all the theoretical definitions. Basically, let's just say it's stories with pictures and words. Though, as you can see, once you get into the nitty gritty of it, it can vary. So yeah, so first suggestion of don't forget that for every creative professional, he or she, they'll have their own journey. So what might work for me would not work for you. So you have to find your own path. But these are some very general observations which I think are usually universally valid. So the first thing is, you should always have this idea notebook where you write down whatever that comes to your mind. It could be just fragments of thought, it could be a sort of a little bit of dialogue, it could be a note for a character, it could be a situation, whatever, it doesn't matter. You have to have this habit of basically constantly writing down any of these stray ideas which come into your head. So that's actually your professional life. So it's not like a 9 to 5 job. You have to be constantly, one part of your brain has to be constantly working on this. So yeah, so any of these things. And it's like going to the gym. Basically, it's like developing those creative muscles. So you have to have this way in which you look at situations and think, okay, this is a situation, what could happen here, what would, let me add something, let me use my, so you have a normal situation, let me add something to it, and figure out what would happen. So that you have to have that ability to do that constantly. So yeah, so getting into comics, so you have prototypes, you have people have been drawing art on cave walls for 40 to 70,000 years. So the idea of this is there, and the idea that you can have a bunch of images to combine to combine a bunch of images to give a larger meaning is also there for more than 50,000 years. Like, for example, a depiction of a hunt, a depiction of some religious ritual, whatever it is. So you have huge, miles or hundreds of meters of cave walls showing one particular hunt. So the idea of taking one image and adding more images to it and creating a visual narrative or a sequence it's there at the beginning of our race. These are things from Bhimbetka. So yeah, so you have a very wide range, and this is on the temple ceiling of Lepakshi temple in Andhra. So you can see the evolution, the complexity, the richness. This is from the Cherial scroll painting. So here the narrator actually, there's no text. The narrator sings or recites the story as he shows the images. So various combinations. This is from a Jain manuscript. I'd like to divert your attention to the fact of these pillars. You can see these pillars here. So the way the pillars have been used to kind of break up this narrative. We'll come back to this later. This is from the Yusufain Dargah in Hyderabad. Here you can see these prayer beads also. They're depicting various scenes from the life of the saint, and you can see how the prayer beads have been used to break it up. This is from the famous painted Nayan Sukh, I think from Himachal Pradesh. And here this is a death, it's called the death of Wali. I'd like to show your attention to these caves, these hills, actually, these mountains, and the way these, one second, let me just remove this thing. Yeah, so you can see the way these caves, the mountain ranges have broken up one very large complex image into a series of smaller images. So that's one way of, you will see this technique recurring. And yeah, so we just quickly overview of the form. So this is, I'm sure a lot of you can recognize this from Amma Chitrapada. And this is a basic thing. You can see that there's one page and you can see these various images have been arranged around it. The technical aspects are this is called the panel. This is a gutter between the panels. You have a caption, like a narration. You have dialogue. You have someone thinking something, and you can have sound effects. So this would be the panel. This would be the gutter space. This would be the dialogue, the speech, and this would be the caption. So this caption says "One day in the Darbar of Akbar." So that's just like the narration, overall narration, and then you have the dialogue. So this seems to be a fairly simple way of doing it, but you'll see that there's actually a lot of complexity there. So yeah, so in this basic structure, you can do many things. So they have the same, the panel and gutter and structure, yet you can have very completely different art. So that gives you the superstructure. The kind of art you fill into that is, you can do many things with it. So here, a superhero comic, for example, the people, the characters, Batman, Superman, they're very imposing, or they're very muscular. So the images tend to sort of showcase their, the strength and power. So there are a lot of variations in the style and the approach, how we do it, but the basic structure is the same. Of course, you can also play around with it. It's an incredibly experimental medium, but you can play around with the form of it, and you can do many things. So this is a basic structure. You have the panel, you have the gutter, and you have the dialogue and the caption and the sound effects. So these are the various sound effects. You can have bang, pow, crash, whatever it is. You can have the caption. So all of these you add. And then of course the color, very important. So have a look at this. The same image, if you can color it slightly differently, you get this. So that's a huge difference, right? So the color is also extremely important. If you can, look at the way the eye has been drawn to that jellyfish or something, and here it's completely, obscured with all these other fish. You can also set the mood. Like the same image has a very different mood. There's a very evening, very mellow, very twilight kind of a feel, while here it's daytime. So the same image, just by changing the color, you can do all that. Yeah, and the final thing is on the gutter space. So I'll just go back. Yeah, so this is the gutter space, this space between the panels. This doesn't seem very important, but actually this is extremely crucial for the comic. The reason behind that is it's something which this American artist called Scott McCloud. If you've one sec. You can see this. So he wrote this book called Understanding Comics. So if you're interested in the theoretical aspects of comics, please check it out. I'm assuming that this thumbnail thing isn't showing in the final video, right? Because it's kind of distracting. Let me just move it out of the way. Yeah, so what he says is that you have the this gutter, and this is very, very important because you have these two images. You could have a third image on the side, and the way you perceive it, maybe this man kills this man, or maybe this man does something else, or he escapes, or something else happens. All of that is by the in that gutter space. So I can have three images, 1, 2, and the third image, and that could either show this man killing him, or this man turning the tables, or maybe a superhero coming and helping him, whatever it is. So it's like these two images, and the brain kind of assembles them and creates a meaning of its own. So that's very, very important. So the gutter space is actually very important. So it's not like a film where you show everything, like a character goes out of the car and gets into a building or something. In a film, you can show it. You can just keep the camera running and you can show the whole, one long take. In comics, you kind of break it up and you reassemble it, and that reassembling is very, very important. That's how you control the flow of the comic. Yeah, the other very important thing in comics is that in a film, you sit in a theater and the director or whoever, they show you the film at a certain rate, 24 frames per second or whatever, and you kind of watch the whole film from beginning to end. In a comic, you can start by reading this panel or this panel or that panel or something. So I have to present the panels in such a way that your eye kind of follows it. So normally the path is that his eye starts, it is in the Western tradition, the eye starts here, goes like this, goes like this, goes like this, goes like this. But of course, you could suddenly, if you find this panel interesting, you could look at that first. So it's kind of important that I make sure that your eye goes like this. So that's a additional complication which comics have, in which that I don't have any control in the order in which you read. So I have to very carefully arrange things that you read them in the correct order. For example, this is something from one of my comics. If you notice here, I have a lot of detail here. The artist for show, he put a lot of detail here. And by this panel, the last panel, you see very little detail in the background. You just see a block of color. That's because I want you to kind of read the dialogue. The dialogue is very important, but it's a lot of dialogue in a page. So if I add lots of background details, then you won't read the dialogue. You'll get a bit distracted. So the first page is nothing important in terms of dialogue. Sorry, the first panel. So I can just have the whole scene. I can show you all the books, the globe, the maps, whatever it is. But by the final panel, I just want you to read the dialogue. So I kind of try to reduce as much detail as possible in the background. So this is like a simple way of arranging this thing. So yeah, another creative tip: you have to, if you want to get into writing, you have to read. You have to constantly keep reading. You don't even have to read everything that's. It doesn't have to be in your subject area or whatever it is. You have to read very widely, because each book is a sort of a different world. It's the world of the author, or it's the years of the author's experience, his or her experience of life, distilled into 200 pages, 300 pages. So each time you read, you kind of experience that, and that is very, very important. So in the beginning, when you start writing, you tend to sort of imitate other writers who you like and so on, and after a point you find hopefully you find your own voice, your own very unique way of looking at the world. But it's very, very important that you read and you're very well aware of it doesn't have to be, as I said, topical stuff, what is happening now. Whatever that you find interesting, you have to read, and you sort of imbibe unconsciously all the techniques, all the things that happen in the background, and you learn the various ways in which a simple story can be handled in different ways. So I'm just going to look at a quick case study, a couple of case studies before getting onto this. So this was a comic which we did, the first one which we did with Harsho, me and Harsho and I, and so we had to have a teaser. So it had to be like some 12 pages or 10 to 12 pages. So it had to have a lot of high impact, because it was a first effort. So we had the idea of an auto wala as a character, auto wala auto. So Harsha drew him, and I thought, okay, what is the most dramatic way of presenting this character? So I came up with this idea of having a time traveling auto. So instead of a time machine, the auto itself is a sort of a time traveling device, and the auto driver actually works in different time zones. So he carries people not from Panjagutta to Banjara Hills, but from one era to the other era. And once that happened, so then you have to find a passenger. So maybe we have this guy who is this British, British era kind of a hunter, who for some reason wants to hunt dinosaurs, and he gets trapped there, and he needs to catch an auto to come back to Hyderabad. So that made sense. And then you have this whole dinosaur chasing the auto, etc., etc. So here you have 12 pages. You have to make it high impact. You try to find. You start with the known, so everybody knows what an auto wala is. But generally, people don't see this juxtaposition of a dinosaur and an auto. You kind of take two disparate elements and you put them together, and sometimes that creates maximum impact. And it's visually interesting. It looks very, visually striking. So that's one way of doing it. So you approach it in terms of the kind of impact that it needs and so on. Another one quickly I can show you. This is from another comic which I did with the artist Stan Chow, called Robots of Dharma. So here, uh, we had to create this world which is very dry and a sort of apocalyptic future Hyderabad. You can make out Charminar is sort of a half in ruins. The whole city is sort of coming apart. It's a very dry, dusty, inhospitable place in the future. So, so once we had that idea of this dry sort of a place, we also had these robots which are sort of living there, uh, and Stan did the design. And I kind of said, told him that look, Hyderabad is very dusty, and these robots, they're very shiny, and they'll get covered with dust. So Stan had to add some, like some, they're actually wearing not clothes, but some sort of a cape or a robe to keep the dust away. So there's an example in which you have a logic of a story. There's a certain internal logic. You develop that logic automatically, as in that would, you don't have to do anything. The logic of the story itself dictates certain things. And then once you had the idea that it's a very dry and dusty place, so the flashbacks would be very, with water, with greenery and so on, to contrast between the past and the beautiful past and the terrible present, which is our future, so on and so forth. So even if you notice, even the color, the way the color is handled and all that, it changes everything. So yeah, so another tip, it's very, very important that you constantly try to create, because we are in a world where you are the ultimate consumer. You can open Netflix, you can, well, back in the day, you could go to movie theaters, whatever it is. You are constantly uh, put in the role of a consumer. The society or the economics of this world dictate that you're a consumer. So it's very important that you move from this passive consumption to active creation. So you try to spend some time in the day doing something unique, something which you are doing, not you're just sitting in front of a screen. The other thing is, the phone, which unfortunately even I also just have next to me, is your enemy, because a lot of, in terms of the creative life, what happens is that many times you're just bored. You're waiting, I don't know, you're waiting something for somebody or something. You have 10 minutes at your disposal. Immediately now what we do is we just reach for the phone. Any free time, it's filled up with whatever it is. You open your phone, you look at Instagram, you scroll on Twitter, whatever it is. But just imagine you don't have the phone and you have 10 minutes of boredom. So you're bored. So what happens when you're bored is you're just sitting there, and ideas or thoughts start flashing into your head. This is very common. And sometimes the interesting thing is, if you're a creative person, these ideas and thoughts, they have their own life, and they start sort of leading you on this journey. And it's as if you're watching a movie playing inside your head. Uh, if you're a very creative person, or you kind of develop those creative muscles, this becomes a very big thing. You can actually spend half an hour sitting looking at the wall, but actually having this whole rich film playing inside your head. So it's very important that you allow yourself to get bored. Like you kind of let your mind sort of go free, let it sort of let it allow thoughts, ideas, images to flow into your head. If you immediately stop it by looking at the phone or doing something, or calling someone or something, then you cut that. And if you keep cutting it, after some point those ideas and everything will stop. They just won't come anymore. So it's very, very important that you take some time out of your day. Taking a walk is very good. Or just, if as much as possible, not to do, not meditation, but leave your phone aside and just sort of think, and let the flow of ideas come through. It's like a guided daydream basically. And because you have the notebook which I mentioned, you immediately write down whatever ideas you have. So that's how the whole creative life really starts. Yeah, so finally we come to the case study. So I think we have around half an hour, I think, or 25 minutes, I'm not sure. So I'll just kind of quickly go through it. Yes, so this project was quite interesting. It's a very so this is a very typical practitioner's viewpoint I'm giving you. It's not a theoretical idea. It's a very, very, if you are in the creative life, this is how things will happen. So I got a phone call from the German Cultural Center in Hyderabad saying, look, we have an urgent project. It has to connect Hyderabad and Hamburg in some way, and you have a turnaround of 2 to 3 months. Can you do something? So I said, okay, I'm up for it. And they said, you know what, we will fly you to Hamburg, but in reality, you must have already come up with 90% of the story by then. It's not like you go to Hamburg and then start working. and we'll already find you an artist. So they found me an artist, Fabian Stolz, with whom I work. So we were corresponding on email, and I had a very short window to somehow find something connecting Hyderabad and Hamburg, which could be done in a few months, and which would use comics, and which would have some common cultural background between these two cities. So because of the because of the fact that I had uh, a lot of ideas, because I keep writing these ideas down and I've been doing it for years, I immediately went back to those folders. So I have a whole bunch of archive folders, and I started looking at all the ideas I had to see if anything could be done. Now, though I had some preconceived idea that this is how it should be. For example, I did not want a very simple way of doing it was imagine that I'm some kind of a tourist. I go to Hamburg, I meet another character who's from Hamburg, and then we have some discussion. I talk about Hyderabad, he or she talks, that other character talks about Hamburg. But I didn't like that. I thought it was way too simple. It has to be something more creative. So I had all these ideas in which I could do things. So one thing was I want to find what I call the 0 point. Like, what is the point in which these characters meet? How does so you have a character from Hyderabad, a character from Hamburg, they meet somewhere. That point, what is that? How does it happen? It can't be some tourist going to Hamburg or something. It has to have something there. So I looked at a lot of stuff. I also wanted to have bring in fables, myths, legends of the city, civilizations, all those things. Like some lots of ideas I had. I wanted to have them in the background somewhere, and I want to have a strong conflict point, as in something they're like fighting each other, they're helping each other, something. There has to have. There can't just be two people who are there just like that. There has to have some kind of an action there. So I looked at all of them, and I, because of earlier interest, I knew a little bit about World War I, where a lot of Indian soldiers fought in Europe on behalf of the British Empire, and of course Germany fought on the other side. So I had decided, what if there's a German soldier from Hamburg and a Hyderabad soldier, which made sense because a lot of people from Hyderabad did fight in the war. There are lots of memorials, monuments in Hyderabad and Secunderabad. So that part of the history I already knew a little bit about. So then I started looking at other legends which I was also interested in, which is the tunnels. So Hyderabad has a long history of tunnels and treasure hunts and mysterious, city beneath the city, world beneath the world, mysterious tunnels under Charminar. Golconda is supposed to have this hidden, fortress under the thing, etc. etc. All these urban legends, myths, we've all heard them. So I had World War I, I had Hyderabad tunnels, myths, legends. So now I had to somehow combine them. So I started doing a little bit of research, and I started looking at the German and the Indian soldiers and so on. And I realized that a lot of World War I had a lot of trenches. Like they would dig these long lines into the earth and to as a fortification. So okay, now you're digging trenches, you have hidden tunnels or treasure hunts or whatever, and you have a soldier from Hyderabad and Hamburg. So then it all made sense. Like maybe I can somehow put all of these things together. And the other interesting thing, then I look at the characters. What kind of characters would they be? Now the thing was that at the time of World War I, by 1914, Germany had not fought in a major war since 1870. So almost 44 years of peace. That means the German soldiers would have very little experience of war, the officers or the soldiers, especially the soldiers. While the Indian soldiers, because they were fighting for the British Army, and the British Army was all over the world, constantly fighting, expanding the empire, they would be very experienced people. So immediately I knew that the German soldier has to be this young guy who is sort of a very enthusiastic, but he doesn't know much about war. And the Indian soldier has to be this older guy who's very experienced, and he's a very sort of a not cynical, but he's a sort of a like very detached. He's very cool, calm kind of a guy. So that was the contrast. So I had a young, excited German soldier, the older, more wise Indian soldier. So that was the combination. And then Fabian immediately began doing the sketches, like how would they look and so on. So there's a long process in which he does lots of sketches, looking using research, of course, and then we kind of find a look. So we had some sort of a rough idea of how they would look like. Then, of course, the whole idea of the digging the trenches. So they would actually dig something like this, and they would actually, in fact, even try digging under the other opposing soldier and try to blow them up or something. So this trench warfare was happening. So I had to take trench warfare, hidden tunnels, and so on. And now a lot of these Indian soldiers, because they were not fighting for their country, they were fighting for the British crown. They wanted to somehow flee the battlefield and come back to India. And the British, in fact, would even shoot soldiers as deserters if they did that. So I thought, what if they have this idea that they find some hidden tunnel which will take them back to wherever they want to go, like a whole network of hidden tunnels under the earth which will connect the whole world, maybe some kind of a magical artifact. So that was one idea. And of course, there are lots of these myths. There's this Agharta, Shambhala, whatever. There are lots of these myths and legends of these hidden worlds. So if you go online and type Hollow Earth or Agartha, you'll find like a million links. So there was all this. I looked at some of the famous books. The book which interested me a lot, because I read that as a kid, was Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. And that book, if you notice, there the characters actually start from Hamburg. The heroes in that book are from Hamburg. So I knew this. So that immediately made the connection that it has to be sort of a like a takeoff on that very famous Jules Verne book, and you have this whole Hollow Earth, or the center of the Earth playing a role. So then now I had the structure. So within a week of this project, because I'd already done some earlier research, I knew that it will be World War One. It will have this Hollow Earth. It would have these urban legends. It would have this the hidden world of the Nagas, because they are the beings who live under the earth, etc., etc. So then, if you look at the visual thing, Hamburg, of course, is it was very heavily damaged during World War Two. But generally, the city looks more or less. They're very newer portions and the older parts, but it looks fairly. excuse me. It looks fairly coherent. But in India and Hyderabad, like you'll have the very old with the very new. Like you'll have a very old building and someone has demolished part of it, built a new apartment, etc., etc. So this sort of a time jumps are there. So the way time seems to move differently in different parts of the city. So I wanted to put that also into this. So like we had some images just to show, like one side of the street is Hyderabad and the other side of the street is Hamburg. So the same street has two different cities, as if these cities are merging into each other. Because we had this sort of a urban legend and magic as the back of the plot, we could do stuff like this. So in essence, basically the underworld of science and the underworld of myth. Now, what do I mean by that? So this is a thematic, heart of the book. So Jules Verne's book, if you read it now, which talks about the hollow earth, dinosaurs living, in the middle of the earth and so on, sounds completely magical or fantastic. But when Jules Verne wrote it in the 1850s and 60s, he actually was using modern science then. So modern science in 1850 is like magic now. So I found that quite interesting, that the way science has evolved. So I wanted to have this sort of a myth of science and the myth of myth both coming together. So that was the thematic idea behind the book, basically. And of course, we had this just a promotional poster which we did. Uh, so you can see the way Fabian has used the snake, the Naga snake, uh, as a sort of a panel separator, just like I showed you in the earlier example of those mountains and pillars and so on. So one image got broken up into a series of smaller images, and this one we looked at the old Hindu texts on the depiction of the Naga underworlds. They would have these. There was no sun, so they would have these huge jewels at the on their heads, and those jewels were so bright that they would light up the whole world. So we kind of looked at those aspects as well. Yeah, and then finally we had to have a treasure map, because treasure hunting and all that is very standard. So we had this whole sequence, uh, of Indian soldiers. The Indian soldiers had huge camps. They would have their own cooks, everything like a mini India, basically in Europe, and they would actually play games and so on. So I thought, okay, let's bring this game in. Of course, this is not the let's bring in something like Snakes and Ladders, which came to to the West, but it's obviously an Indian game, which is called in Andhra, it's called Vaikuntapali and so on, or Mokshapath, whatever the various names. Each culture has its own way. So yeah, let's use a Snakes and Ladders. I think this is from a Jain text. Let's use that as a kind of a treasure map. So you have these snakes, you have these ladders, and there's some kind of treasure. So let that become part of the whole myth. So you have this one soldier who has a kind of a map, hidden magical map, which will take you to wherever you want in the world if you follow those tunnels. But of course, you have to be afraid of. You have to, ensure that you don't get. It's a Naga world, so you can't just go in there. You have to take the permission. And then these two soldiers have the map and they're fighting for it, or whatever. You have the story start developing like that. So then you see, okay, now I'll show you how these sequences are built. So this is my text in which I wrote, page one, panel one, wide shot, close up, whatever it is. Now the thing is, and these are sketches which Fabian did. Now I can show you something. So you have this whole sequence of these Indian soldiers charging the initial battle sequence, where they get machine gunned or get blown up by the Germans. And then you have the, so we like the thumbnail. So we like this, like this flat approach, like you just have these four panels, and then he did a more detailed work, and then we added color. Now here what I did was, you can just have the imagery, but the text I added, you can, oh, maybe I don't know if it's clear now, but you can see something like, both armies filled with joy stood addressed for battle, like two agitated oceans. That wide and unparalleled encampment of the vast host, those well armed and broad chested warriors. The world resounded with leonine roars and twang of bows and diverse other kinds of noise. Now, that is actually from the Mahabharata. It's actually a depiction of one of the battles in the Kurukshetra. So, I had this idea that you take the imagery of the World War One battle, but the text you actually add from the Mahabharata, from Kurukshetra. So it doesn't make sense in one sense, because you have the, he talks about bows and arrows and all that, but I thought it had a certain mythical significance. Like these soldiers they're fighting in this huge world war, which is like Kurukshetra. So you have them fighting, and you have all the machine guns, you have modern weaponry, but the background, it's like the text from the Mahabharata. So that is a sort of a juxtaposition here which worked. So this is what I meant when I said that you have to look at these odd combinations, and these combinations suddenly somehow click, and they seem to be working. For me, at least, it worked. I thought, if I just put something on World War One, it didn't. In my opinion, it didn't make any sense. I had to ground it in this myth, basically. So yeah, so basically that's just to sum up the whole thing. So you have to do a little bit of research, in the sense that your mind has to be like a recorder. You're constantly looking for patterns or symbols. You have to look for simple visual ways in which you can show an idea, and you have to figure out how do you break down complex subjects into simple, easy to get visuals, or at least combine them, basically. So these are some of the practical aspects of making a graphic novel. And the final tip I would say is that, yeah, they say be a sponge. You have to constantly look. So it's not like a 9 to 5 job. If you want to be a creative professional, it's not like 9 to 5. You at 5 o'clock you finish your job, you go home. You're constantly working. You're constantly looking at people. You're constantly looking at the world. You're constantly trying to remember. You're constantly trying to record, and you put them all down. You don't know where you'll use it. You may use it tomorrow. You may use it 5 years from now. You may never use it. For example, this World War One comic I did, I started in 2017, but the initial idea I had that in 2012 or something, about the treasure. So I just wrote it. I never knew whether I would use it, but it's just there, and then it came into use. So that's what I mean when I said that you have to constantly be, looking and thinking and trying to think. Basically, yeah, it's like if you think well, you can write well. So what is thinking well? Well, that's, I leave that up to you. But what I mean is, you have to find a way of looking at the world. Once you find a way of looking at the world, which is your way, only your way of looking at the world, then you translate that way into film, into text, into books, poems, whatever. But the most important thing is to finding that way of looking at the world. If you don't find that, then the technical aspects of filmmaking or comic book writing, they're not very complex. I mean, you can learn them very fast. But if you don't have that way of looking, unique way of looking at the world, then technical expertise doesn't count for much, because you're just like anybody else. So you have to find your own way of looking at the world, and I think that is the most important aspect of being trying to be a creative professional. Yeah, thank you so much.
I would like to thank Jay for giving us this. It is a relatively a new genre to explore, especially when it comes to India, because you said it's kind of getting popularity in the Western countries, but yet in India it is quite nascent. But we really enjoyed, and thank you for elaborating on the hard work that goes, because I think with imagination and creativity, and you need to get the mechanics and the techniques of it right to make it appealing to the reader. So quite interesting to hear that, and thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.